Welcome back to the Brothers Mahoney. I'm Michael,
And I'm James.
and today we're discussing a rather interesting story, being the Abominable Snowmen. This is a second Doctor story with Jamie and Victoria as companions. It was written by Mervyn, Haisman, and Henry Lincoln, same duo who also wrote The Web of Fear and The Dominators, which we previously discussed. It was a six-part story that originally aired from September to November 1967. And it was the second story of the fifth season of Doctor Who. So James, what be the plot, bruh?
I don't know about that syntax, but according to the back of the Blu-ray that we watched this from, and of course this one actually you can watch on the Doctor Who Classics YouTube channel. I believe it's been picked up in full. The one on the channel is the colored version of the story, and we watched the black and white version, but we'll get into that. The plot is as follows. In the 17th century, an old Tibetan friend of the Doctor's reached out and touched the mind of an alien disembodied energy known only as the Great Intelligence, giving it a conduit to Earth. 300 years later, the Doctor revisits the Himalayas because he wants to return the Holy Ganta, an ancient relic he was given many centuries ago by the grateful monks and their master, Padmasambhava, at Datsun Monastery. On arriving, however, the Doctor is treated as a villain, blamed for a series of brutal murders in the area. Jamie and Victoria, meanwhile, discover the true culprits. The previously peaceful Yati that live in seclusion on the mountainside have apparently turned violent. The Doctor must convince the monks that not only is he not their enemy, but the real foe, and the power controlling the Yati is living amongst them.
Yeah, and what's particularly interesting about this story is that we've never seen it before. I forget when this Blu-ray came out, but I do know that we just had never taken the time to actually watch it before, like a handful of other somewhat newer releases, like Galaxy 4, I believe.
Yeah, Galaxy 4, we've touted Fail from the Deep a couple of times, but we have not actually finished it. And for the record, the Blu-ray came out September 2022.
Yeah, I think Evil of the Daleks is another one that we haven't seen. So there's been a handful of early Doctor stories that we just haven't had a chance to see yet. So it's interesting and sort of exciting to actually watch some new second Doctor material.
Yeah, and like so many of the ones we haven't watched, in fact, probably all of them, the reason we haven't watched them is because they are missing an episode or another, and while the tally snaps exist, and I'm not opposed to listening to or watching a tally snap, they were never just released singly on DVD, at least not certainly in the modern age. Maybe back in the late 90s or early 2000s, there was something akin to that. But other ones we haven't watched, and this one, include animation. And we've seen some of the animated ones before, we just haven't discussed any of them, so this is the first. The only existing episode of the original story of this was episode number 2. The other episodes, and again, this is a 6-part story, so 5 of the 6 episodes are animated. There's both a black and white animation and a color animation, as I mentioned earlier, and we chose to go with the black and white version just because it was the second Doctor era. It seems more right to us to go with the black and white version. The animation for the record was done by Digitoons Media and Entertainment, and I don't know, I thought the animation is pretty good.
Yeah, we should say that we have seen, I guess I can't say how many stories that we've seen that were partially animated, but sometimes the animation is good, sometimes it isn't. There's definitely a range there. I think James previously mentioned the Reign of Terror, which was a bit, I don't know, I wouldn't even know if I would call that animation poor. It's just the aspects of it just, I don't know, it just didn't look great at times.
Yeah, and it can't be easy to animate the ones that they have, and I guess we should be happy that they've been animating any at all. I'm assuming there are some people who would prefer to just stick with the tally snaps, and one can do what they want to do, of course. I don't know, I appreciate them taking the time to animate these things, even if they've said previously they're probably not going to animate everything, because they do have unlimited funding, and of course this takes a lot of effort and work to do.
Although I would be okay with the BBC shutting down Doctor Who for a year and divert that funding into finishing off animating stories. So
if they were going to do that, they should have done that during the 13th Doctor era, because they seem to shut down for a year every couple of years anyway.
Yeah, that's true, but I guess before we talk about the plot of this one in detail, here's a brief cast. And actually, we have the second Doctor, played by Patrick Troughton, Jamie by Frazer Hines, and Victoria by Deborah Watling. And what, this is Victoria's third story?
Yes, she first appeared in The Evil of the Dark, which we have in that scene, and then The Tomb of the Cybermen was her first non-Daleki adventure, at
Yeah,
least on screen.
going from Daleks to Cybermen, what a treat.
We could all hope for us, Mats.
Then we have the character of Travers, played by Jack Watling. Somewhat interesting thing, Jack Watling is actually the father of Deborah Watling, actress who plays Victoria. So that's something honestly I didn't notice until after we finished and I was looking through these cast members. But yeah, it happens to be her father, which is sort of fun.
Yeah, I believe I read that Deborah, this is actually one of her favorite ones that she filmed just because she got to act alongside her father, which I can understand.
Then we have the somewhat familiar name of Norman Jones, playing a character named Chris Young. Norman Jones has also appeared in actually two previous ones that we've discussed. He played Major Baker from Doctor Who and the Solarians, and he also played Hieronymus from The Mask of Mandragora.
And even though it was one we didn't love as much, he was certainly one of the standards in that story.
Yeah, he made it arguably a lot more tolerable. He was sort of fun. Also, we have Tomney, played by a David Spencer, Rinchin, played by a David Gray, Abbott Songston, played by Charles Morgan, and lastly we have Ruth Morris, who voices Padma Sambhava, who's sort of like, I don't know what, the master of this monastery in a way. I'm not sure exactly what the title would be.
Yeah, I suppose these were Buddhist monks. I mean, they had to have been. They had a statue of Buddha. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the title would be either. He seemed to be the master of the monastery, and yet only one person was actually in contact with them. The rest of the people in the monastery literally never saw them. They just listened to Abbot Songston, who was the only one in communication with Padmasambhava. So I guess they just had to take his word for it. I mean, the monks would probably just trust each other.
They did seem like a pretty trusting people.
Also, I appreciated how even though there were obviously a lot more monks than we saw of at one time because of all of the gods, we only focus on, 5 or 6 of them at most?
Yeah, and I get it. When you're trying to, especially when you're trying to animate something, you can only animate so much. So you try to keep it to the bare minimum. But that said, I think they did a pretty good job with the characters. I guess they focused more on, like some of these characters I mentioned, like Rinchin, doesn't necessarily get a ton of important scenes, but he had a personality to him, which is more than you can say for some of the others, which is why I chose to single him out.
Yeah, I think most of the ones who appeared, even among the gods, most of the ones, especially if they were named, had very enough personality. It was kind of nice on the whole. Most of them weren't overflowing with personality, but useless sparkles here and there, and that's always good.
So I will say one interesting thing about this one is that it opens up with the Doctor coming to this Adat-Sin monastery, and apparently he's been here before. I think he said about 300 years previously he was here.
Yes, he says that, and so does the back of the plot of the DVD. Which, for the record, the first paragraph of the DVD plot, as far as I'm concerned, is spoilers, because we don't learn the specifics of which it's speaking until, I think, episode 5.
Yeah, that's pretty classy. Yeah, the Doctor has actually been here before, and he's expecting sort of like a big welcome back because he has like a holy relic that was given to him when last he was here. He doesn't really get the warm welcome he was expecting, but he does get to meet the Yatis, and that's always fun.
He does get to meet the Yatis, and really, what more could you want?
Yeah, the Yatis are one of those classic antagonistic forces. I mean, they're not necessarily an antagonistic force to themselves, they're just robots in control of another antagonistic force. But they certainly have an interesting design to them. I mean, who can't not like how fluffy and playful they look?
Yeah, you pass one of these on the street, you're going to notice.
They look somewhat cumbersome, honestly, but I do think they have some character to them, and it has like all the stylings of classic Who. It is worth mentioning that while we haven't seen this one before, we have seen the Web of Fear before, and that also has the Yatis in it. So it's sort of nice seeing them here, both in like the one live action episode and then animated. They look playful as ours.
And of course, it is, I think, going to be a lot more fun to revisit the Web of Fear now that we've seen this one. And of course, if I'm not mistaken, there is an animated version of the Web of Fear now. I believe that we are missing one episode, maybe two. And we had watched the original DVD release when they had first found a lot of the missing episodes. And it is a very bare bones release, if I'm not mistaken. But they have since re-released it, and we haven't watched that one yet. So that's going to be fun.
Yeah, and what's also sort of fun is that, like many things in, I guess, the Doctor Who lore, the Datsun Monastery has actually appeared since this episode.
I'm sure you can't even see a vehicle in this show without it having its own Wikipedia page and 3 appearances in the audio.
I do always enjoy that Who-mobile, am I right?
Jesus, that was hideous.
It's classy. Come at me, fam.
I guess Martha always liked it, but her taste was always a bit unseemly. But, so yeah, the Datsun Monastery actually shows up in The Secrets of Dit Sin, who would have thought, which was a first Doctor story featuring Stephen and Dodo, which came out in the 7th series of the Early Advancers, which was a big Finnish audio range featuring stories of the first and second Doctors, maybe the third Doctor, but I think it was mostly the first and second. It's similar is to the Companion Chronicles, only it had a full cast as opposed to just one or a couple of people reciting the story and seeing some flashbacks of it. And this one came out, the 7th series of the Early Advancers, in August 17th, 2021. And apparently, if I'm not mistaken, the actress they used for Dodo, because the actress who originally played Dodo had passed away, and Asher wasn't really interested in doing any of the audios anyway. I guess they weren't able to get their class into everybody. And the story was actually dedicated to Deborah Watling. So I suppose that's a nice gesture.
Yeah, and I have to admit that while I generally enjoyed this story, I'm not sure if it's one that necessarily warrants a lot of deep discussion topics. It's certainly an okay story, but I just got sort of like a low-key feel from it. Like, not a lot happens for like the first handful of episodes. I'm not saying we get a lot of filler, but I'm just not sure how much really goes down. It just takes a bit to sort of get moving, in my view.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think a lot of that is because the second Doctor is just not really in the position due to events around him to figure anything out until around episode 5. He attempts to figure things out, but he either gets distracted or he gets put in prison for the 4th time in the episode. And in the same room, it's always the same room. I guess the animators had to save some money. And, you know, I agree they had a very low-key feel. It's obviously a very important episode because it spawned a sequel later on in this season. A character who we will discuss who shows up in even modern Who and books and audios. And I'm not talking about Travers, although Travers also shows up again. The daughter of Travers and Travers later became very important in her own right because she was basically a precursor to, I never remember her name, the daughter of the Brigadier.
Kate?
Yes, Kate Stewart. She was basically the precursor who I believe Anne Travers was in charge of unit during, I would say, most of the 90s, if I'm not mistaken. I know she appeared in a couple of books, anyway.
And there's no point in holding anyone in suspense, because if you listen to this, you probably know this already. But we are talking about the Great Intelligence. And honestly, I'm not even sure if it's correct to call him a character. It's more like a thing, an entity.
But nobody questions things, and people did question him.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting the way this story goes, because the Great Intelligence is sort of using the body of Padma Sambhavar to sort of speak through, and he's speaking to, I believe it's Abbot Songston, he's speaking to the Abbot through this body, and occasionally the body, Padma Sambhavar, has his own will, but I mean, I think it's also been kept alive for 300 years, so he's had a pretty bad time of it.
Yeah, no, it's actually really interesting, and it's the only way the story could have worked too, now that you think about it. But the Doctor who met Padma Sambhavar in The Secrets of Dit Sin, in the first Doctor story, he obviously knows the person, but this story taking place 300 years later, it would have been too obvious if the second Doctor walked in and, oh, there he is right there. So like I was saying earlier, no one actually knows or has seen the Master except Abbott Songston. The second Doctor never gets to see the Master. The second Doctor doesn't even hear the name Padmasambhava until, again, I would think maybe episode 4, probably episode 5. And that's when he realizes, oh, that's not right. He couldn't be here 300 years later. But again, it takes so long for that mystery to even get to him. I think his name first came up at least in episode 2, if not episode 1, and yet somehow the second Doctor hadn't heard it once until episode 4 or 5. So it seems like everybody else knows more than he does.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces to this puzzle. At that point, the Doctor's a lot more concerned about these nearby Yatis, who seems to be killing not only members of Travis' expedition, but also some brothers of this monastery. I think they mentioned about 5 or 6 brothers have been killed by Yatis. So, I mean, at the beginning, that seems to be the Doctor's main concern. And then once he finds out the Yatis are robotic and they're being controlled by something, then he's trying to figure out what's controlling them. But through a lot of, I guess, delay that's not really his fault, he just isn't able to figure that out until much later on. It doesn't help that Travers is like a water vein. He just turns every other time he pops on screen.
Travers might have been actually the most fun character in this story now that I think about it, because he was such a dick at the beginning. An absolute dick. Even as late as episode 4, he was almost going to make a decision that made me just not gasp, but it was absurd what he was going to do. He decided against it, but he was close to doing it. Basically, he was going to let Jamie and Victoria just walk into the Yatis, not warn them or anything, because he was doing his own things. But then things happen where that doesn't become the case. But yeah, I don't know. It was he was a fun character. Like I said, he was maybe the most interesting. And like I said, it's going to be very fun to revisit the Wab Affair now that we have this introduction to him. I think it's going to mean a lot more when he shows up again. Because the Wab Affair, if I recall correctly, takes place in quote-unquote modern-day London at the time, so the 1960s. Or was it the 70s? And so this is 30 years previously, and he was an ancient in this one. I would say he was in his early 50s. He didn't look too young.
I mean, yeah, I'm not sure if we can fairly say, but I would say mid to late 40s, potentially early 50s. Honestly, he could have been younger, but
I guess he had to have been because, again, 30 years in the future is when the Wab Affair takes place. But of course, in the Wab Affair, we also get to see the Great Intelligence again. Well, maybe sees a strong word. I have to admit, I remember the Yatis in the Wab Affair. I don't remember anything about the Great Intelligence, but I'm sure he was there.
Well, I remember toward the end some stuff of the Great Intelligence, but I guess it's best to relive that in our own time.
No, and that's fair. Usually I have, on the whole, about the memory than you on this stuff, but I do not remember the ending of Rich's Peak revolving the Great Intelligence. So that will be fun to revisit. But so the Great Intelligence is one of those, I would say, classic Who villains who, even though they never appeared that much, were still remembered enough by the fans and the fandom that they actually were brought back in the modern Reviver series. The Great Intelligence waited 44 years, but eventually they returned in the 11th Doctor story, The Snowmen. And I do think the Great Intelligence coming back was actually a really fun idea. I do not think it had the best finale, because I believe the name of the Doctor is at least partially incoherent, certainly towards the ending. I think a lot of the setup is extremely fun, but the ending is it's just not out there.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, to be fair, we are talking about Moffat, so I don't know, it's sort of par for the course.
Yeah, no, Moffat can really get ahead of himself in some ways.
Yeah, I think it's a fun idea to bring back a classic antagonist like the Great Intelligence, especially since it's not like we even get a great hang on what he's even trying to do in this episode. Like, at one point, he has the Abbot place together a triangular sphere creation, and then we see a bunch of, and I wonder how this looked in the original live-action show, but we see a bunch of what looks like light, strings of light growing out of this cave, and I can't tell if that's like him trying to take form, or I'm not quite sure what that's supposed to signify, and it's probably not good. But point being, we don't get a great hang on what the Great Intelligence is even trying to do. And in fact, the Doctor, when he finally confronts the Great Intelligence is like, oh, Doctor, your mind is too puny to understand what I'm trying to accomplish. So it's like, oh, okay, great fun.
That's an easy way with a rat to just say, don't worry about it. But I think it's actually quite fun for the Great Intelligence to have come back. Even if this toys they came back into a rather sad part. I think the Snowman holds up, but the other ones were not the best. But either way, the actor was really good. And the actor being, of course, Richard E. Grant, who not only is a classic British actor, was the voice actor and I suppose you could say model, for the Salka Doctor in Scream of the Salka, who was, as we saw in Rogue, actually canonized. No matter what RTD says about, oh, it's just a little fun. He needs to stop having fun, because there are people who actually care about the universe. Oh, and fun fact, and this is something I didn't know because I probably forgot. Richard E. Grant was also in 3 episodes of Game of Thrones. He played Isambaro.
I can tell you how much I don't know who that character is.
Yeah, Isambaro was the head of the acting troupe that Arya was in over in Bravos during season 5 or maybe it was 6. Nah, it was 5 because I remember how terrible the one episode was. He was the head of the acting troupe. You would probably recognize him if you saw him. I do think Grant has a pretty recognizable face. But alas, Grant was not the Great Intelligence here. And it's interesting because later on they brought back the Toymaker, who had an even longer gap between appearances, at least in the main show. And I don't know how long that one was, but he appeared in, what was it, 65 maybe? Maybe 66. And then he shows up again in 2024? Or was it 2023? I think it's 2023. Either way, there was a hell of a long gap between appearances. But that's the joys of Doctor Who. You get to do things like that.
Yeah, and anytime they bring back a classic antagonist, like sometimes it may not even be as long as a break, but think about things like the Zygons, who only appeared once in Classic Who, and then didn't pop up until, what would that have been? Time of the Doctor? One of those things?
No, the Day of the Doctor.
Yeah, same idea. It's just some Doctor thing.
Also, and this is an interesting one, the Makra.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Makra only had one story of note. Who's to say it's even of note? Because of the Makra tear, which even was before this story, then did it pop up again until Gridlock, being season 3 of the revival. So,
and there are even smaller ones like the Autons from the Third Doctor's time being the first antagonist from Classic Who to be brought back even though they weren't named. And the Ice Warriors, who did a show up until, was it Cold War?
I'm going to say yes, that sounds right.
I think there have only been 2 Ice Warrior stories in the revival, which, hey, is par for the course. There were only 2 main Ice Warrior stories in the original. So I guess they're down with them for now.
Yeah, so obviously I wish that when they had brought the Great Intelligence back in, what would that have been, season 6B?
Season 7.
7B.
Well, not even really 7B, more it was in the Christmas partial in between the first half and the second half.
I'm going to call it 7B. So, even though it's a nice idea that they brought it back, I do wish the execution had been better, but I guess there was still some strong portions of it. But anytime Moffat's trying to do some type of, drawn out story, I feel like he gets a bit extravagant, but I guess it's neither here nor there.
He easily loses the plot a lot of the time for longer stories, but on the whole, I think most of them stand up. It's just that season 7B was not his best writing, frankly, as far as I'm concerned. And I don't think I'm alone there. I think it's, on average, the lowest ratings of any of the newer Who stuff before you get your Chapnel. And just as a fun little note, the Great Intelligence, as part of the course for Doctor Who, also appeared in a couple of audio stories. In the Diary of River Song Series 6 from August 27th, 2019, they showed up in one of the stories entitled The Wab of Time, which is a title very reminiscent of The Wab of Fear, which I'm sure is exactly what they were going for. And I'm sure that River Song will love the Great Intelligence. And speaking of people who will probably love the Great Intelligence, they also showed up in the story Time of the Intelligence, which is a frightful sounding time, from the New Countermasters Series 2, December 19th, 2017. And the fact that there are 2 Countermasters series from Big Finish when Countermasters appeared in a single story of Classic Who just shows you the extent that Big Finish are going to do anything.
I can always see that Grinch smile thing. Or you have a character that only had one scene, then cue Grinch smile.
That's basically how they must think.
I appreciate the audacity though, so.
The audacity is fun, and it is kind of nice to see the most random things pop up in places like this. I mean, the Yatican Church Pierce himself show up in a Torchwood audio play entitled Golden Age from July 2nd, 2009, which for the record predates Children of Earth by around a week or so, which was the third season of Torchwood. And I have to admit, I'm a fan of Doctor Who, I like Torchwood, but I didn't even know these audio plays existed. These aren't big famous. They were just, I think, released on CD or just played on the radio. And it has the actors from the Torchwood series, at least a few of them, including John Barrowman, and the actors for Antor and Gwyn. So it's a real story of actual worth. And yet I've never heard of these things. I wonder how easy they are to get a hand on, but I guess I'll have to figure that out later. But when you have a universe that has such expansion that a Torchwood audio play references and not just references, I believe it's rather a large part of the story, something from a episode 40 or 50 years ago, that just shows the fan of the universe you have. And I suppose the goal of whoever wrote it.
And I guess getting back specifically into the Abominable Snowmen, like I said earlier, there's not necessarily a ton that comes to mind, but I did want to talk briefly about not so much Victoria's character arc, but she sort of has some amusing things going on here. Early on, the Doctor is sort of out exploring a bit, leaving Jamie and Victoria behind to look for the Holy Ganta, which we referenced earlier. Well, actually, we probably did reference it by name, but it's a holy artifact that the Doctor was given.
The plot referenced it by name.
Well, that's okay then. So he leaves Victoria and Jamie behind to look for it, and after they find it, Victoria just gets bored and wants to leave. I do find it somewhat amusing that Jamie, for all of his rashness at times, he generally seems to be a pretty responsible guy. It's like, no, we should wait for the Doctor. And Victoria just doesn't have any interest in that. She wants to go out and play, have fun.
I mean, it's very possible the only reason Jamie was so responsible there is because Victoria was there. I'm not sure what the age difference is, but I think she's maybe 5 years younger than he is. But maybe it's not as bad as that. But I do think he's just trying to be pretty protective of her. Because he doesn't know what's out there, and the Doctor did say to stay put.
Yeah, and once they actually get to the monastery, she's intensely curious about this whole Padmasambhava thing. Like, she's wondering why, oh wait, you have a master that you've never seen? Are you curious what he looks like, what he's doing?
Yeah, she was extremely insensitive about their beliefs.
Yeah, not only that, I was going to say she's extremely naive about religion. It's like saying, oh Jesus, do you even know he's real? Is he even there, brah? I mean, you're not going to ask a bunch of Buddhist monks about... I don't know anything about Buddhism. Point being, the questions were, like James said, somewhat insensitive. It's like she's never heard of a monastery before. Like she doesn't understand the point of it. I just found it sort of amusing. Although you could easily see other companions do that same thing, but it just comes across as, especially in this, I guess, religious setting, comes across as more insensitive naturally than she would have met, but it just comes across as sort of amusing.
God, do I would she rose to the monastery.
The funny thing is, I was thinking about Tooth and Claw, which isn't quite the same thing, but she's just yucking it up there and having a go all the time.
There are some issues with Tooth and Claw. The way that they're acting in this story is not how they act. To me, they seemed out of character just to make a point in that story. But I suppose...
I think they smoked a bunch of space weed beforehand, so they're just having a good time.
I don't know, man. But they seemed out of character to me in that one, wholly just to make a point.
I do like Victoria here, though. At one point, she and Tomney, and Tomney's a character who, he's one of the security guards in this monastery, but he sort of gets, I don't even know what you'd say. Like, at one point, Chris Song, who's suspicious of pretty much everything that breathes, he starts getting suspicious of Tomney, saying that, he has some type of plot with Victoria, and he actually has both of them thrown into a little jail cell. Well, I say jail cell, it looked somewhat spacious, but not enough space, as the first Doctor once said.
Yeah, and Victoria did a plan so small she pulled one over on me.
Well, yeah, and it's partially because of the setup. This one guy comes in to deliver drinks to the two of them. At that point, we had already seen the Great Intelligence say we have to take care of these two, or something along those lines. So Victoria has a sip of this drink, and then she starts choking, and OMG, she's poisoned. But as it turns out, she's just faking it, just to escape from the cell and do some investigation. The funny thing is she did something similar earlier. She was actually left in the cell alone earlier, and on a side note, like James mentioned, the Doctor and Jamie are thrown into a cell multiple times. It seems like almost a third of the story takes place in the same cell. So that's why there's not as much forward momentum in this toy. But early in this toy, Victoria's left in the cell alone and she asks if she can have some food. So once the guy goes to make food for her, she just slips out and does some investigating. Like, she sort of cracks me up. It's to a detriment though, because unfortunately she does end up getting somewhat possessed by the great intelligence, thrown into a trance. Doctor, we must leave, I'm in danger. Ah.
That would have actually been fun to see in live action. It's easy to animate a blank face in animation, you just don't move the mouth and whatnot. But that would be harder for an actor hypothetically to pull off, so that would have been fun.
Yeah, it's sort of hilarious. She's thrown into a trance. The great intelligence does it with the doctor investigating, because even though it has no respect for the doctor's puny mind, it still knows that he's one of the smartest people here. And if anyone here could figure something out, it would be him. So he just doesn't want the doctor here. He doesn't want to kill him or anything. He just wants him gone. So it puts Victoria into a trance. So when Victoria hears the doctor's voice, she just says, "Oh, we're in danger. We have to leave." Then she just clams up until she hears the doctor's voice again, just repeats the exact same thing in the exact same intonation. It's not the best job I've seen of a post-hypnotic suggestion, but I guess it tried.
You would think the great intelligence would be able to do better, but perhaps, I suppose, one, he hadn't had too many humans to interact with besides these monks, and really just one of them, or two of them. And also, maybe they didn't have as much time as they were hoping. Maybe it could have been better done if they had more time. And the final showdown was kind of fun. There was as much conversation between the second Doctor and the Great Intelligence as I would have liked. I would have liked a good, at least 5-minute conversation to nail down some of what the Great Intelligence was actually after.
Although I have to wonder, and I don't know the answer, so I'm actually wondering this. When they were doing this toy, did they already know they were bringing back the Great Intelligence for the Web of Fair? Like, was the Web of Fair already written when they did this one?
Honestly, with the way that this show was done, I wouldn't be surprised if it hadn't been. But I do appreciate this toy did have at least some emotional resonance, which is not something you can say for all of the classic Who stories. But I actually did feel for the second Doctor when he saw Padmasambhava, because the Doctor knew him and befriended him back in the day, and he's just seen basically his desiccated corpse, while he's being forced to have this half-life by the Great Intelligence. You could really feel for the second Doctor there, especially when the Great Intelligence is just using the body to just laugh at the Doctor. Which was a great scene, by the way, when the Doctor's leaving that room and he just hold the body laughing at him.
Yeah, and that was sort of creepy. I think that animators did a pretty good job in that scene too, with this very desiccated. I mean, like I said, this guy's been forced to live over 300 years by the Great Intelligence, and he has like these scary glowing eyes and sort of a creepy lopsided face. I think the animators did a pretty good job with that scene, bringing a little bit of the horror vibe in.
And they also had a fun time making him levitate.
That's true. Yeah, the finale is, I think, actually sort of interesting, because the Great Intelligence, through Padmasambhava, is a force to be reckoned with. The Doctor's trying to... What is he trying to do? Knock over the little chessboard of the Abominable Snowmen?
Honestly, I think that second Doctor was only there to do a mantle battle, which for the record, it's a mantle battle where you literally just see the Doctor holding his hand while he's moving closer to the body, and that is kind of it. We don't see any.
Yeah, I like to think through his perspective. It's like a Three Doctors type thing when he's fighting Omega in that creepy Nan place.
I believe that thing literally comes up again somewhere.
Beautiful. I like to see it. And while he's doing that, this Jamie and Trav is trying to destroy some control panels. And it's a somewhat action-packed scene, like James alluded to. The body of Padmasambhava sort of levitating in its ultimate power, and it's fun. It's like exciting enough to be enjoyable, even if the story as a whole took a bit to get there. It was still fun.
And I couldn't help but notice they have a skewed leading into the following stories, and they've gone the horror movie route of just showing, oh, but the evil's not done yet.
Yeah, at the end of the Tomb of the Cyberman, we saw that there's a existing Cyberman that still had a bit of life in it, and we had a pretty similar final scene in this, when we see, I think it's the hand of a Yeti start to move again, like it's not gone yet. There's something still a brewing.
Yeah, it's still being animated somehow. So perhaps the Great Intelligence is great still.
And it only, takes 2 stories to get to it again?
Yeah, no, I think it's the Ice Warriors up next, and then I think it goes right back to the Wild Buffalo, yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, that's beautiful.
It's actually very similar to when he shows up again in Matt Smith's season, because he shows up 3 times in just one season. So I guess they were really just going back to the roots there.
Yeah, but I guess before we give any final thoughts on this one, there's obviously exciting timeline to look forward to.
Yeah, as listeners know, the TARDIS Wiki is a personal timeline for each Doctor, including the extensive expanded media, ranging from the comic books, comic strips, Big Finish and BBC audio, the multiple book ranges and everything in between. Doctor Who canon, insofar as it actually has one, is a jumbled mess and has been forever, so I just like to see where the stories for discussion fit into the universe as a whole, as continuity in the narrative timeline has always been of interest to me. And this placement shows off the complete randomness of what the TARDIS Wiki counts as quote-unquote canon on the timeline, and I don't criticize what they count as canon on the whole, because there's basically no canon. As long as something does have the Doctor dying when he's sure to be dying, it's probably canon. But even then, there are some cases where something gets included where it seems unusual, like Death Comes to Time, which is actually placed on the timeline somewhere, or at least was at one point. Now, right before the joys of the Abominable Snowmen, we had Doctor Second, which is a children's book released in August 29th, 2017, written and illustrated by Adam Hargreaves, which was in the series of books known as the Doctor Main series. Now, this series is interesting. My brother and I are not British, but if you were a child in Britain growing up in the 70s, 60s, 80s, 90s, you might have actually read any number of these. These have existed since 1973 and 1974, around there, originally written by the father of Adam, Roger Hargreaves. When Roger died in 1988, Adam took over doing the series of books. He fought a little reluctant, apparently, which is understandable. But eventually he got the art style down, and he continued writing and illustrating these books in his father's style. And these are just children's books, though maybe 20, 25, maybe 30 pages, much like the Dr. Seuss books in a way, just with these characters going through events in a children's book type of way. They're apparently very positive, very happy. Apparently there's even a nice worm who appears throughout, who actually has a page on the TARDIS Wiki. And there were books of these published for all of the, at the time, 13 Doctors. And obviously they weren't all released at once. I think they were released in batches of 3 over a period of maybe 2 years or so. And Doctor Second is one of those books, of course, featuring the second Doctor and I think Jamie, although I don't remember if it was Jamie or not. You would think it would have both Jamie and Victoria, but I can't swear that it did. But either way, so that takes place previously, at least on the timeline, right before this one. Right after this one, it's just the Ice Warriors, which was as we said, the next story coming up after this one in the classic series, which is another 6-episode story out of this season, besides Tomb of the Cybermen, was basically 6 episodes, which is interesting. And that one, for the record, 2 of the episodes are animated, so that is a lot more complete than this one was.
Yeah, but as for this one, I'm not sure if it's because it's 6 episodes long, but it did feel like it took a bit to really get going. Now, I'm not going to say I was bored, because I wasn't. It was certainly entertaining, but there's just sort of, I don't know, it just didn't feel like a lot was happening at times.
No, I would agree, and it's interesting because I never thought it was slow. I don't think I thought it was slow once. To me, it felt, I suppose, in a way, comfy, where there was no, on the whole, there was no immediate danger coming to anybody, mostly. There were some scenes where Yatis could have been pretty dangerous, and there was the aforementioned Victoria 5D chess move of fake poisoning herself. But on the whole, it's just, I don't know, it felt comfy. It's a strange term to use in regard to a story like this, but especially when it's one that I don't think was the best, but it's just a word that comes to mind. It's never going to be something that I say, hey, if you're a Second Doctor fan, you need to watch this. Because I'm not sure the Second Doctor really did all that much in this one. Did he even have any amazingly memorable lines?
Yeah, I feel like I'm just blanking. I feel like nothing immediately comes to mind, which might just mean no.
Yeah, I mean, there was the scene I liked that I mentioned where was talking to Padmasambhava, and that was really nice, and where he was basically mourning him and what had become of him. And that was a really nice scene. I don't know, it didn't seem to be as witty as the Saga Doctor usually would be in most cases. Which maybe given the circumstances is understandable, but it also undeniably makes it a little less fun, at least for me.
Yeah, and it's also true that it's sometimes a little more difficult to get invested in something that's mostly animated. Like, I'm not saying I paid more attention during the second episode because it's the only existing original material, but it's just not necessarily the same watching animated with the voices as opposed to watching a live action portrayal. It's one of the things where it can't be helped. Naturally, like James said, we could have watched the Tala Snaps, and I would personally prefer animated over Tala Snaps. But that could be part of it too. Since this has been the first animated thing we're discussing, maybe we'll find out later if it's like a consistent, I don't know, feeling going forward.
Yeah, I think that is very possible. And it is something that we can certainly look out for when we cover whatever the next animated one we cover is. I mean, what are there? Around 6, 7, maybe 8 animated ones? And there's going to be more too, because we don't even own this last year toy maker yet. And I know there have been talks about what the Smarglers? No, the Savages. Either way, we have a lot that we can test this theory out on. So I look forward to when we do our next one that is animated, and we can see how we feel about that one.
Yeah, but I guess for final thoughts for this one, it's okay. Like, honestly, out of the second Doctor stories that we've seen so far, ones that come to mind, like Tomb of the Cybermen, the Dominators, even his appearance in the Three Doctors, this might have been like the least engaging. I don't think that means it's a bad story, but I just wasn't necessarily as invested in some of this. Certainly, there are amusing sequences. I do think it's funny how Travis' character sort of switches back and forth between being a dick and being helpful. But on the whole, I can say this is one I really want to see again in the near future. I just don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, if I was to watch it in the future, I might want to watch the Thales top version just to see how it compares.
Naturally, though, that's just our thoughts on this one. I was curious to see if you have other thoughts, if you've seen either a Talesnap reproduction or this animated version, or hell, just even listen to the audio alone. I'm sure it came out on probably CD, just the audio. I know a lot of them have. So let us know here down below or on Twitter/X at Brothers Mahoney if you want. But what do we have coming up next, James?
Up next, we have the 13th release in the main range of Big Finish Doctor Who stories, The Shadow of the Scourge, featuring the 7th Doctor, played by Sylvester McCoy, Ace, played by Sophie Aldred, and Dr. Bernice Summerfield, played by Lisa Bowerman. And this is in fact going to be our first introduction to Bernice, because she first appeared in Love and War, which was the 9th novel of the Virgin New Adventures range, featuring, of course, the 7th Doctor, which came out on October 15th, 1992, and we have not even read Time Worm Genesis yet. So we have never been properly introduced to Bernice. It's a name I recognize, but the most I could tell you is that I think she's a Proto-River song. I think she's an archaeologist, but that's basically all I know about her.
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't even know that. I just know that she's a woman and the doctor knows her, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, this was one of, I believe, 4 Big Finish stories that were kind of, what were they called? I think they were called side trips. And it was on the whole a rather unofficial name, because eventually they just went forth throttle doing whatever they wanted. But I know there was this one, there was another one featuring Bernice in the main range with the 7th Doctor and Ace. Then there was one with Frobisher with the 6th Doctor, and Frobisher is a shape-shifting penguin. So, that's not normal. And I believe there was one other one, but it's not coming to mind. Like I said, they were kind of unofficially called side trips, which basically meant Doctor Who canon from other forms of media, not just the classic series. That being, of course, the Virgin New Adventure range and the comic strips from which Frobisher comes from. And by the way, that's not too far away either, the Holy Terror. I've always heard really, really good things about it, so I am quite looking forward to that one.
Yeah, so the Shadow of the Scourge should be interesting. I think it's a tad on the longest side, like 2 hours, 20 minutes or something like that. But to be fair, they also have another character beneath Summerfield to fit into it. So it'll be interesting to see how they work with Ace. I'm assuming she already knows Ace, if they mind that now or so. That should be fun. Hopefully it's somewhat of an easy onboarding, but you never know.
I would really have my fingers crossed that it will be a good onboarding. I suspect what they'll likely do is just play it like a normal story. She just does things normally. It's probably not going to do a whole, oh, you're beneath Summerfield and going to Ocean and whatnot. They'll just probably already know each other and they'll just go on the whatever adventure takes place. And that'll be fine enough. As long as we know the very basics, it should hopefully just work out fine.
It is the basics of them. But yeah, Shadow of the Scourge coming up next. Some more Big Finish material. So you have that to look forward to.
Yeah, for the first time in what, at least a year?
Yeah, it has been. It's been a hot minute, as the kids say.
Yeah, I believe the last one we talked about was it the Apocalypse element? Or was it the Fires of Vulcan?
It's one of them anyway. Yeah, I mean, after a year, who can remember stuff like that anymore? That's been our somewhat fine discussion of the Abominable Snowmen. Certainly an interesting episode again. First time that James or I have seen that one, which is the first for Classic Who. So it's nice, and it'll be nice down the line once you get to more that we haven't seen. But yeah, I guess as always, thanks for listening. This has been Michael.
And I've been James.
You've been enjoying the Brothers Mahoney, and have yourself a placid night.